Hello and welcome to another tutorial video. In this video I'm going over writing exercise 12, distinguishing multiple characters. Characters are the beating hearts that give stories life within books. They are the actors who sit in the driver's seat and help to keep the momentum of plot moving forward. Without them, there wouldn't be much of a story to tell. Having one character is good, but even better is multiple characters with different roles in a story. However, if writers aren't careful, sometimes it can be harder to distinguish who is who and who is saying what in a given scene, which can confuse your readers. So how can writers distinguish multiple characters in the same scene? The following key points are some helpful tips in doing this. The first key point is don't use too many names with the same first letter in a given scene. For example, Joe, Jim, and John. This can quickly cause confusion. So when you name your characters, it's best to use a mix of different letters in their first names. It's okay to have some characters, like maybe 2 characters or possibly 3 in a scene, as long as the names, are different lengths, things like that. But primarily you want to use a mix of letters for your character names so that it's less confusing. The next key point is to give your characters distinctive voices, attributes, and traits that differ from one another and can be used to tell them apart for your readers. This one is extremely helpful in being able to identify your characters of your cast and within a particular scene. One thing that many people don't really use, or many writers don't really use with characters though, in properly identifying them, is clothing. This is just another way that you can be able to identify your characters aside from just describing their physical appearance. Because who knows, you may have 2 characters that have brown hair or 2 characters that have blue eyes or whatever. So using clothing is another good way that you can properly identify your characters. So that's just something a little extra to think about when distinguishing multiple characters in the same scene. The next key point is to use pronouns to properly identify male and female characters, especially any characters with unisex names or names that can be used for both sexes. This one is also helpful with being able to identify your characters and distinguish them, because some names can be used for both men and women or both boys and girls. So that's something else to keep in mind. For example, names like Ashley, Jordan, Miriam, things like that are a couple of names that can be used for both sexes. So if you have characters like that, it's a good idea to use pronouns to be able to identify whether this character is a male or female character. So that's something else to keep in mind as well. The next key point is to include dialogue tags to your advantage, especially with character names and for 3 or more characters. So if you have 3 or more characters within the same scene, it's a good idea to include those dialogue tags and with their names, because if you have like dialogue without identifying who's saying what, that may cause some confusion within that particular scene. So add a couple of those dialogue tags in there, here and there, with the characters' names, when you're writing multiple characters in the same scene. And finally, the last key point is to pay attention to characters' personalities, motivation, and dialogue more than their physical appearance, which can help give them more life. So many beginner writers, they pay more attention to the physical appearance of characters, but it's really the characters' personalities and motivations and dialogue that really help give characters life and make them stand out. So that's something else also to keep in mind when it comes to distinguishing multiple characters in the same scene. Below here, I have pulled in a passage from my novel, The Pack of Freedom, from chapter 12 in the story, when the characters reach the first safe house of Miss Perkins' house, which is an old, elderly Quaker lady that they stayed in for shelter for the night. I'm just going to read through this passage just to show an example of distinguishing multiple characters in the same scene. And as I mentioned before, with clothing, using clothing to identify characters, that's pretty much what I did in this particular story to help me to identify the different slave characters. For example, Joseph here, one of the field male slaves, he wore a green shirt, so that is something that I used to properly identify him. There's also a younger lady slave, Anna, in the story. I used a blue shawl that she wore a lot to properly identify her. And Margaret, one of the older slave women, who's a house slave, I used her personality of being a cook to help me to identify her. So that is how I identify them in this particular scene in this chapter 12. I'm just going to read through. I'm going to act out the characters a bit, so pardon me, but I'm just doing that to just give the scene a little bit more life. Joseph ate a spoonful and wiped his mouth with the long sleeve of his olive green tattered shirt. "Name's Joe, ma'am. But there ain't much to know about me. I ain't seen my mama since I was 4. I reckon I'm the same as most other slaves, trying to keep my head above water. I ain't got no family aside from those I lived with on Master Crabtree's plantation." Miss Perkins eyed the young woman in a blue shawl sitting beside Joseph on the floor. "And thou, miss?" "I'll be Anna," she said, and bowed her head. "My big brother, Ozzie, he's still left from the plantation. I and the others had to run 'cause Master Crabtree was going to sell us. I can't read, but I'd like to learn after getting my freedom in the Promised Land." "Greetings, Miss Anna," Miss Perkins said. "I'm pleased to meet thee." Anna wore a shy smile and nodded. "Likewise." "I'm Marge," Margaret said. "I've been a house slave since I was a young girl, but I can make a good pot of hot stew, beans, chicken, beef, any kind you can think of." "That's nice. How doest thou like my chicken and dumplings? I hope I did them justice," Miss Perkins said, and started rocking again. Margaret grinned. "Oh, it's fine, ma'am. Best meal I had for hours." So that's just a example of distinguishing multiple characters in a scene. But that's all that I have for this tutorial video. I hope it was helpful, and thank you for watching.